Hello and welcome to Healing Tips from the Heart, Intuition with Helpers, Healers, and Guides. I am your host, Dr. Lori Hops, licensed psychologist, writer, and artist. I've explored mind, body, and spirit related to intuition, or your personal guidance system, since early childhood. Meet my guests who have learned from their personal and professional lives to explore vast realms of knowing, synchronicities, and overcoming challenges. Their stories may inspire you with tools to enhance your daily living and relationships. Hello and welcome. I have a wonderful guest today, Greg Carpenter, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist, performance coach, and is certified in a technique and approach called IEP, which he'll be talking about, intention energy process. The other thing that Greg brings to his work is that he is a sound therapist, and he's going to be sharing some of his sound healing work with us today. Greg uses mind-body therapies to relieve stress and anxiety, address relationship concerns, and increase his clients' vitality. Greg has found that meridian tapping with intention energy process and sound therapy together to be a highly effective technique to help people move towards personal transformation. So welcome, Greg. It's so good to see you.
Hi, Lori. It's great to connect this way and with this new forum for your podcast.
Yes, thank you so much for coming.
And thank you for inviting me to be here.
Yes. And so I just want people to know that we met several years ago through the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology at one of our conferences. And we have had connection with, with colleagues supporting each other. You invited me to come to one of your talks and be a demo subject with your sound healing, which was great. And I'm so grateful that you're here and helping share your gifts with us.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
So can you tell us a little bit about this process that I mentioned that people may not know so much about?
Yeah, the sound therapy, I had been trained in doing EFT and EMDR and some other mind-body techniques. And then I got into drumming in the drum circle community and began to get curious about how I might apply that. And so my first little singing bowl was about this big, a little $60 singing bowl that I bought. And I started playing with that for myself. Then I got into more singing bowls. And I brought one here today. I'll just give a quick demonstration. But it has a pleasant sound. And then also you can sing it by rubbing the rim, which has a little different effect. So the Himalayan singing bowls are just magical to me. So they pulled me into the sound therapy world, and I started to do more studies. So I went from the singing bowls to utilizing drums, frame drums in my practice, and then also even the didgeridoo, and then the Native American flutes, and then behind you, covered up because of the glare, is a 40-inch gong, which is kind of the latest thing that I've really adapted and used in my practice. So my understanding with sound therapy is there's like 4 levels that I have found that work with clients. So the first level was, I find a lot of people don't really realize what a true 0 is on the 0 to 10 scale in terms of being absolutely relaxed. And so I would take my big easy chair that I had, set 2 bowls on the armrest, 1 big one at the foot, and then 2 behind. And I would play those singing bowls in such a fashion to get a following frequency response, that is to get the brain waves to entrain to the relaxation sounds. And everybody was reporting how incredibly relaxing it was. So the first goal of that was just to teach people that they could go deeper into relaxation than maybe they'd ever experienced before, with a hope that they would get hungrier to practice the other techniques that we were learning. And that was kind of how I started out doing it. It was just to teach about relaxation. Then I began to realize that I could incorporate that into processing stresses that they had. So like one time I had a client come in that was fit to be tied, angry. I mean, just visibly upset. And I had learned about taking the frame drum and playing it like about 6 to 8 inches away from the body, up and down and on the sides, to clear out the kind of auric field from thought forms and negative energy. So I asked this client if they wanted to try that, and he said, "I'll try anything." And so I did that, and it was amazing how quickly this person went from being emotionally unregulated to getting into a more emotionally regulated space where she could actually talk about what happened. Same thing can work with different types of rattles, that you see in the Native American tradition or some of the shamanic traditions. I would do the same thing with that and get really great results. So the second level would really be just helping people to emotionally regulate and process whatever emotions were coming up, in the session.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are two of the kind of earlier ways. And then I began to work in deeper ways of using different sounds to help clients go deeper as we were working through things. And I'll say a little more later on about how I use intention tapping
Okay.
with that technique.
Right. And you said there's 4 levels?
Yeah, and then the fourth level, so the third level would be you can do it bilaterally and just ask people to follow whatever's coming up
Can you
after the.
describe bilaterally? Not everyone may understand
Yeah,
that.
so what I did originally was, because of my training in EMDR, I would take 2 bowls and put it on the armrest and then
Mm-hmm.
just go back and forth bilaterally. And we would target an issue or an anxiety or a memory. And then I would just ask them to follow what came up. And I would say, "What's happening now?" or "What are you noticing now?" And so instead of doing the eye movements or using headphones, it had bilateral stimulation, which means literally going left to right, right to left, back
Mm-hmm.
and forth. Um, I was using the singing bowls to do that. But then eventually what I learned was that it did not need to be a bilateral stimulation, but that it was
Oh,
actually the sound, the relaxing sounds of whatever resonant instruments I was using would open the doors to the unconscious so we could do a deeper processing. So the
okay.
fourth level would be literally just my playing the sounds in a kind of healing, therapeutic way, and you go on a journey, and I'm not checking in with you. The
Okay.
third level would be I would be tracking what's happening now, what are you noticing, maybe asking questions, combining a little talk therapy with that. But there is a kind of sound healing process where you just set the stage through sound and let people go on a journey. So it might be 20 minutes, 40 minutes
Yep.
of,
Got it.
and then people at the end of that would
So
record
that
it.
one probably is for when you have a deeper trust relationship. You're not so concerned about where someone's going to wind up getting in trouble somehow emotionally or triggered. And also maybe people who are more experienced with the meditative state or something.
Yes, exactly. I was going to say that's the caveat. I was really reluctant, even though I'd been kind of trained to do that with some of the trainings I went to by sound healers.
Mm-hmm.
I was always like, well, I know about, being re-traumatized and ab reactions and strong emotions and stuff. And I kind of wanted to know what was going on. So I was checking in more with people. But as I've learned to do this more and depending on what the goal and how stable the person is and what we're working on, I've found that sometimes you can do longer sets.
Great. So, my mind, as you're talking about the 4 levels and the sound and the instruments and kind of your development of how you've grown yourself and what you're using, I just couldn't help but wonder in the back of my mind, I hope it's okay to ask, what bridged you to bring sound healing into your therapy space? Is it okay to ask that?
Oh no, that's a great question. I'm always of the belief that if I'm not getting results, then there may be something that I haven't tried or that I don't know. And I'm kind of experimental in nature
Okay.
in that way. And when um, and I had done some reading about, actually not clinicians, but more, sound healers that didn't have a psychotherapy background,
Mm-hmm.
and was studying the way that they were doing it. But I knew, that doing like an hour session, like in some ways, some of what sound healers do is like an hour session, like you get a sound massage for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I needed to be able to chunk it down more. So I think it was really EMDR that probably gave me the bridge and the confidence, my training to do the bilateral sound and come in and experiment with that.
And
And
then
when I,
maybe people would want to know that you all do have a deep training and experience as a musician. So this wasn't just something that is a hobby or that you thought of one night.
Well, interestingly, I mean, I did have some background as a musician and that I was in a college choir that toured. But other than that, and my father was a band teacher at one time. But other than
Mhm.
that, I really wouldn't have considered myself a musician. So I didn't actually come at this as a musician.
Ah,
I became a musician
oh,
as a result of the sound therapy. And
okay.
so then as I developed skills with these instruments, I became part of a group called Drum Nomads, a performing drumming group, and so actually my performing as a musician developed out of my sound therapy practice.
I didn't know that. Thank you for
So
clarifying.
yeah, so you don't really need to be a musician to incorporate a lot of these simple techniques.
Yeah.
Um, the flute is obviously a little different, where it took a little more learning and skill.
Mhm.
Same thing with the didgeridoo to learn how to do circular breathing, but really using the bowls and the rattle and the frame drum didn't, just took some reading and understanding how to use that, and but I wouldn't have, at that point, I wouldn't have called myself a musician.
Okay. Thanks for that correction and explanation. I think that it makes it much more relatable to actually know that about you. And because I know that you are an avid teacher of that philosophy, that you don't need to be a musician to be able to use sound healing for self-care and for treatments and interventions. So that's brilliant that you brought in that inspiration from EMDR, and then experimented, and that you have the right clients to kind of help you say, yes, this is a go. This is
Right, and
helpful.
and constantly, checking in because it
Yeah.
does change up, the therapeutic relationship. Like I'm now moving in closer to people if I'm standing over them and I'm playing the bowls.
Mm.
So I was always in the beginning really learned to check in with people. Does it feel okay having the bowls this close? And even now checking in. What some people like the high pitches, some people like the low pitches.
Mm.
So I'll actually, you know, I happen to select just that one bowl today, which some people might have loved. Other people might have preferred some of the lower notes that I have, and there's a subjectivity, to that.
Well, that might be a great segue. Would you like to incorporate some lower resonant sound now, or is there
Yeah,
something else you
let's.
wanted to share?
No, let me. I think I talked about the four aspects. I think the other thing that's important is to be trauma informed in doing this work,
Okay.
because I will tell you a little story. Actually, I don't think I answered the question as well as I could have. You asked me what got me into
Yeah.
trying sound therapy. Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
the actual bridge was I had learned about binaural beat music and bilateral music from EMDR. And so I had really gotten to where I was using that a lot and ran an experiment on myself. Like if I was at a 5 on a 10 scale, I would just put the music on and listen to it in the background, not even really focus on it, just do whatever I was doing, put it on the background. And it did such a great job of shifting my nervous system response to things and even changing some of the neuroplasticity that I was really excited about the possibilities that that had. And so that's actually was the bridge to me then thinking about how can actual instruments do some of the same things in my sessions. So at that point, I had already had clients using bilateral music and
Okay.
binaural beat music and isochronic tones, which are all these different brainwave entrainment type music. But to give you why I say trauma informed is important, I was actually taking a trauma training and doing brain spotting, and I had this theta brainwave music that was very powerful. I mean, you could really feel it pull you down deep pretty quickly. And so I'm telling everybody about it, and so they're literally passing it around at the dinner table during our lunch break, right? It's like, do you want some? It's like it's going. And everybody was like, "Wow!" Like within a few minutes, they were like, "This is really amazing." And now at the far end of the table, there was someone, and I'm talking about this at everybody, and then I looked down at that person. And I saw this look on their face that didn't look relaxed, and I very quickly said, "Wait a minute, let me check in with you." I said, "Yeah, it doesn't feel that good." I said, "Okay, why don't you give that back to me?" And what I had forgot to warn people was that it does open the doors to the subconscious,
Mm.
so it can not just be a relaxation response, but as you relax, if you got an unhealed trauma or wound that's really sitting there waiting to
Mm.
come up, that can bubble up. So that's not the norm, but that does happen, and that actually kind of caught me by surprise. And these were all therapists too, but it was when she talked to me later about her background, then it all kind of made sense.
Yeah, that is such a great point because I think people get enthusiastic, Obviously when people are suffering, they want relief. And like you said, with your first client, he's like, I'll try anything, or she, whatever it was, the person, I'll try anything. And so we have to be responsible and careful that we're not opening the door to something that's going to add to the suffering or help someone go down a path that's going to be very difficult to move away from. And so that's great that you said that. I'm wondering, just off the top of my head, are there sound healing, sound therapy, psychotherapeutic, trauma-informed training programs that you know of that combine those three levels?
Um,
Or is that more rare?
I'd say that's more rare amongst clinicians. I know Mitch Newer is someone that I've studied with a lot who has been in this field for a long time, and he talks a lot about being trauma informed. But I don't know of any places where they actually teach about that. I think maybe in some of his other trainings that I haven't taken, where the more extensive, he might go into symptoms of trauma and things like that. So in my case, I was relying on my own trauma and studies.
Right, your own training and expertise. That's great.
And
Okay,
what I
thank
would
you.
say, like,
Sorry.
yeah, dosing is kind of important. So, like in the example I gave with the frame drum, that might take 3 minutes. So I think some of the uh, some of the more stimulating things like the didgeridoo, the frame drum, or the rattles seems to clear out the negative energy. And I haven't ever experienced that. I suppose if you did it for like 20 minutes at a time, it could do that. So I think with sound, the short dosage is safer of not,
Okay.
triggering something. But as you know, doing this work, there are no guarantees, right?
Right.
I do sound meditation and sound baths using gongs and bowls and all these different instruments I have, and I construct a movement of sound to create that relaxation effect over a 45, 50-minute period.
Mm-hmm.
But I always give people the caveat that to keep themselves safe, because I hate to make the almost hypnotic suggestion that it could happen. But because I know it can happen, I do tell people, like, if something does come up and it's too painful, stop listening to the music, open your eyes, ground yourself, look around the room. If
Yeah.
you need to, you can get up and move,
Yeah.
to a corner of the room or something to break that pattern,
Yeah.
which I haven't had happen, thankfully, but
Yeah.
it
It's
can.
good. It's good. Yeah, I get it. So, great. So thank you for sharing all of that. It's really quite interesting. And just for people who may not know the binaural beats, can you just describe that a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, the binaural beat technology basically can take any kind of relaxation music and embeds it with a tone. So they'll put in the left ear, let's say, a frequency of 100 hertz, and then 120 in the other, and your brain will split the difference and create a hertz. I think is like a 10, if I'm getting my math right on that. Anyhow, they can target specifically what brain wave they want to create and have you entrained to. And so the fact is, it doesn't work on everyone. I'd
Mm.
say it works maybe on a greater percentage of people, but there are some people that effect doesn't work. But literally, it creates a tone that doesn't exist between those two tones, and you hear that little pulse. So generally, there's apps that you can get online to do that, and brainsync.com, hemisync is another one that it works heavily with this. And so usually I would say the tones are like maybe 20% of the overall volume. Let's say you're listening to ocean waves, the tone is maybe, you can hear it, but it's pretty subdued.
Okay.
um, and so that's binaural. Isochronic tones are really a pulse,
Hmm.
so it works in a different way. It's very powerful, I think, but it can be more obnoxious, kind of, because you really do hear it, like you got the ocean waves or guitar playing, you hear this pulse. But it does work very well to train the brain waves.
Yeah.
And then the bilateral, I think, inhibits kind of the firing of the primitive part of the brain and the amygdala by going back and forth. It kind of down regulates that, and I find that to be helpful. To give you a little story, if I'm not going on too much with this,
Yeah, yeah.
I
No,
was
go ahead.
curious. I use the bilateral music a lot. I find it's like I call it like the aspirin of sound,
Hmm.
that it's good for focus because it kind of gets you out of the mental chatter,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also good for relaxation. But it might not take you as deep as some of the binaural beat or some of the other technologies. But I have a friend who does neurofeedback, so I actually went over and said, I want to see what this does. So we hooked me up, put my bilateral music on, and within about 4 minutes, I was firing some pretty good levels of alpha, and she was pretty impressed that it could work that quickly.
Yeah.
The entrainment effect of that. So, and that's kind of what I would have guessed, is that the bilateral puts you at like a higher level of alpha, which is like that sweet spot of being really chill and relaxed, but you could take a test. You're not
So
too chill.
you're not so relaxed that you're kind of drowsy. You still have an alertness, but you're not like ready to jump out of the plane for your skydiving.
The lower alpha or the theta definitely can get you in that place where you're like, maybe you shouldn't be driving.
Okay. Yeah. Great. And so that's so neat that you had that little experiment with some science of the brain waves to see what was happening in the moment. That would be a cool thing to show, maybe with a group of people, have them hooked up and do a group experiment and see what they do. And then what happens when the sound is off, and whether that entrainment remains. Does it linger? Did you try that with her?
Not with the neurofeedback, but anecdotally, I would say in terms of observational science, I've definitely noticed that people report feeling relaxed. Sometimes even like for 48 hours, will feel like, particularly my clients that have really busy minds and struggle with a lot of anxiety. A lot of times they would talk about it lasting through the next day or maybe the next day or two.
Beautiful.
That's not for everybody, but that was. But definitely, there's a way in which, even my own experience is like, if I get really jazzed up and I get down, I don't come back up real quick.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it lingers, and you're also so well practiced with it.
Well,
so is it time to debut some more instruments?
Yes. Let's do the bowl. I'll do like maybe a minute, and we'll have you just kind of be our test subject. And so why don't you have do you have an intention or something that you would like to just focus on to bring in? Could be a feeling or something.
Yeah, I like, because I'm so aware that we're doing this not just for us, but for an audience and over time and space, because we don't know who's going to be watching, listening. And so my intention is that whatever needs to be received is received.
All right, that sounds good. So what I'll know to let everybody know is I'm going to ring the bell, the singing bowl, like a bell.
Okay.
And then I'm going to shift over to singing it, so you'll have a chance. And I'm going to go just probably about 1 minute.
Okay.
1 minute, I think. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, so
I'm ready.
I invite people to close their eyes if they would like. If they're a little nervous about things bubbling up, then I would suggest that you keep your eyes open. Oh, and if you're driving, of course,
don't do this. Turn it off and wait till you're in a safe space.
I forgot about that. That's right. A lot of people probably would be. All right, here we go. And I'll say one thing, that the bowl really becomes this conduit between the client and the therapist. And so where I'm at and the intention I have and the energy I have, it becomes like it becomes like an amplifier in some ways. So I think that, that alignment and rapport makes a big difference. Before I just don't jump right into doing the sound. In this case, I don't get to do that with everybody listening, obviously, but I'm just going to take a
well, just for some feedback there, when you said that, I immediately felt the energy of what is about to happen be here presently already. So
okay. Right.
It's like you've already started.
Okay, here we go. But just kind of tune into how you feel, and if you're able to really kind of be still with that. That wasn't a very long time, but sometimes people are surprised by how settling it can be in
Yeah.
a short time.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And of course, it's even more powerful in the physical space with the vibration. And so we're having a reduced intensity experience by hearing it. But even so, I could feel the energy swirls coming through my body with the motion of the sound.
Yes, the that's a good point. That it's not just talk about brainwave entrainment, but really it's a full body entrainment. So when you're
Yeah.
present with the vibrations, not only do you have the auditory entrainment that happens in the brain and the stimulation of the left and the right hemisphere, but there is the whole body getting the sound waves coming in and working with your body and your cells, and
Yeah.
so it makes for a fuller experience. But I am surprised how good results people get online. I
Mm.
did this. Steve Wells has a group called Uncommon Practitioners, and so I was demonstrating how to do intention tapping with the sound and the intention statements. And then everybody was prepared and had their nice headphones, but one person just had the little silly, laptop speakers, and even she was saying she couldn't believe how powerful it was, even with the tinny speakers that she had. So I think there is something about that intention and how the energy gets carried through the sound in both directions, that becomes important. So I always try to make sure I'm in a good place,
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
I
Well,
start
it's just like the experience I had when you started to talk, and I immediately started to feel the energy coming in, even before you initiated the sound. It was the intention of saying, we are now starting. And I could feel that kind of door open. So there's a lot to that that's about consciousness, I think, and intention.
Yes, and it'd be interesting when I watch the podcast to see how my voice changes. Because quite often when I do play, particularly the singing bowls, I get into this more hypnotic voice, and
Yeah.
and I get into a different headspace myself. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, before we close, I'd love to hear more about Steve Wells' work and what that is for you and all of that, if you don't mind switching gears a little.
Is it right if we do we have time to do one flute?
How about if we, your choice, we could close with the flute, or we could,
We can give them the link. I think in the links in the link there, I have my YouTube channel has demonstrations of the sound, an all flute sound bath, and then also I have some albums that people can demo. I think they
great,
let you demo it for free for 3 times. So
wonderful.
yeah, we can do that. Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So go ahead with your question.
Yeah, we said at the beginning of the interview that this process that you use, and people may not be familiar with it. So I thought maybe you could speak a little bit about that too.
Okay. I'm trying to remember how many years ago that I started working with Steve Wells, and so intention energy process is just using the intention statements, and the intention tapping is you do tapping alongside the statements. So the three main statements are: I release all my emotional attachments to fill in the blank. Um, I restore the right energy flow or balance to, usually it's a body part that's activated.
Mm.
And then I put this experience into the past where it actually happened. Is when sometimes we'll decide, when that's appropriate with, things that are in the past. And then also, when people are really blocked, we have a statement that says, I release all my aversions and resistances to blank.
Mm.
So in terms of intuition, what I find is when I ask people to do that, and then I'll say, don't do anything, just let it do what it does. The idea is that you're using your conscious mind to say the statement, sending a message to your higher self, what
Mhm.
some might call the unconscious self, to work with your subconscious mind, where all these things are stored, these beliefs and experiences and things like that. And then we kind of follow the breadcrumbs that come up and rinse and repeat. But the intuitional part that really is powerful to me is that I'll be listening and doing talk therapy with someone, and then they'll say something, so a word or a phrase will jump out at me like a neon sign, right?
Mhm.
And so often when I say, okay, let's stop and just say, I release all my emotional attachments, and using that key word or phrase that they had, get some really quantum leaps. And then sometimes you start out very general, which is different than traditional EFT, they always emphasize starting, being very specific. But we find with this technique, you can start out and say, I release all my emotional attachments to anxiety, and all roads lead to Rome that get to where you need, and then maybe something specific in a memory will come up. And so it's very much that kind of intuitive process. But I do find that where the intuition is really helpful is like something will just jump out at me,
Yeah, in the moment.
and then you target that.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, the tapping is EFT is emotional freedom techniques, and it's using acupressure. It's like acupuncture without needles for emotional and mental and body-based challenges or activations or triggers. It's a cognitive piece of thought, and then the body-based energy piece with tapping mostly on the head, torso, sometimes the hands. And so you're combining multiple levels, the thought part, the body part, the energy part, the intention, and then sometimes the sound part too. So it's kind
And
of like a one-man band.
right, then what I have found that it's very effective, that people can tap if they want when I'm doing the sound, but when I add the sound in with the intention statements, it works very effective to facilitate the processing and get to deeper issues. And I just want to say that the difference, it's not affirmation statements. Some people think it's just keep repeating the same affirmation over and over. Here you're just saying it once. I release all my, I could say, I release all my emotional attachments to performing well for my friend Lori, in this podcast. And then you just sit back and let that do what it does as you tap through it or listen to the sounds. And then you kind of pay attention. Is there a body sensation, or is there a thought, or is there a feeling? Is there an emotion, or is there a memory? And so whatever kind of comes up, then you mention that, and then you go with that, and then you rinse and repeat.
Okay.
So sometimes it can be very quick. If I can give one example, I was concerned about a client that I was working with, and I wasn't feeling like I was doing a good job. And I was working with Steve. This is back in the very early days of this technique, and he had me say, I release all my emotional attachments to doing it the one right way. Immediately, a spike of energy from head to toe, release some tears, and just, I had a big release on just that one statement because
Wow.
it hit it so well. So it can be, sometimes it's incremental, like climbing, going down the stairs or up the stairs, and sometimes it can be really rapid like that.
Yep, like a volcano.
Yeah.
Blow up the perfectionist
Yeah.
once and for all.
Yeah, exactly. And so in the links, intentiontapping.com is Steve's link for further
Okay.
training and more information and things like that. Yeah.
Yep, on the podcast on Spotify and YouTube, I always have the whole list of
Okay.
resources that we're talking about with links from the podcast. So that'll all be there, including how to get a hold of you. But I'm wondering, is there anything else you'd like to share, maybe about helpers, healers, and guides, or healing tips from the heart that we haven't
Yeah, I
talked
think
about?
one of the things that I think is really important is coming at this with a very open heart and a heart connection. So, the sound really helps me to get centered into my heart and
Mm-hmm.
my ego to step aside and to get out of my head. And I think that's a really important part of any kind of model that you work is getting into that heart-centered place as you're working with people, and sound is one of the wonderful ways it helps to facilitate that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's beautiful. And do you have a sense of how you know when you're in your heart?
Yeah,
Um,
there's a certain sensation I think I feel in my body and my heart, and at oneness with my mind and my body and my spirit. There's
mm,
a centering. Is probably the best way I can think of, is I just feel a centering, and it does. One of the things I think is really clear is that my inner critic. I have a pretty strong inner critic and a perfectionist part
yeah.
that can come out, and that really it really puts it on the bench. It doesn't discredit it, because maybe I need some of that, sometimes, but it doesn't try to drive the bus, so to speak. And that's a really big shift, is when I'm feeling a much deeper level of confidence and inner knowing.
Oh, beautiful. I love the way you put that. I don't think that's a question that I've asked people before, but I think it's one I'll return to, because it is so personal as to knowing when we're in our hearts what that is like, and it can change in situations and over time. But for you, it's that inner critic being on the bench. Yeah.
Yeah, so and that's a really wonderful, wonderful experience.
That's great. Thank you. Oh, this is such a delight. I'm just so wanting another piece of sound healing, if you wouldn't mind. Is that
Oh,
okay to ask for
all right. Do you want to do one with the flute?
Yeah,
Uh,
that would be great.
okay. This is singing tree flute, but he in the Native American style is the way it's designed. But he actually created a Middle Eastern scale,
Hmm,
which I find it to be a really spiritual scale. So I'll give you a little sampling of that.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing your gifts.
You're welcome. It's been my joy. I feel even more centered. Sometimes I'll instead of doing a verbal prayer, I'll actually get the flute out and set an intention for
Yeah.
prayer, and then play the flute, and it's very feels very much like prayers being lifted up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye-bye, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. If you want to learn more, you can visit my website for podcast and resources at hopshealingtips.com. You can also like, share, and subscribe to this channel. This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only and is not providing healthcare advice. Please seek guidance from your professional healthcare team should you need assistance.